In part one of this One American News Investigates, we brought you President Trump's personal attorney and America's mayor, Rudy Giuliani. Together, we waded through a dark and murky swamp of deep state collusion, Democrat impeachment delusions, and nefarious charges against Giuliani. Giuliani debunks some central premises. Rudy Giuliani did not investigate Ukraine in search of Biden dirt. Giuliani started looking into Ukraine way before Joe Biden ever decided to run for president. Biden's corrupt dealings in Ukraine inevitably became a part of that investigation. Again, way before Biden ever ran for office. In this special edition of One American News Investigates, our Ukrainian witnesses arrive and we hold our own hearing where you, the American people, are jury. You decide. You hear from top Ukrainian diplomats and officials who serve as witnesses to testify under oath their side of the story. The side that not only vindicates President Trump amidst 3 years of a Democrat impeachment circus, but if investigated by our Justice Department, could spell the end of Adam Schiff and Democrat credibility for years to come. For each success President Trump adds to his historic first term, Democrat dreams of a 2020 White House grow dimmer. Democrats have since realized impeachment is increasingly their only hope, seemingly at all costs. In July of 2019, Democrats seemed to feel they found their impeachment kill shot. For this next act in the Democrats' impeachment fairy tale, they needed a villain, a damsel, and a prince. In this case for the Democrats, their damsel in distress is Joe Biden, innocent in every conceivable way. The Democrats' villains of choice? President Trump and his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. And, of course, Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler were to share the heroic princely duties. Earlier in this series, One American News sat down with Rudy Giuliani. He told us how he got involved with Ukraine, how his curiosity about Ukraine was sparked by an unverified report of Democrat collusion, a report he then verified with documents and witnesses. Next, Giuliani showed how all this took place under Mueller, not over Joe Biden, and how by default no one could look into the corruption of Ukraine in the last few years without running headlong into the story of Joe Biden and his involvement in pulling the political strings in Ukraine in order to protect his son, Hunter Biden, the one with the cocaine, fidelity, and money laundering problems.
If this were a trial, your first 3 witnesses would be Shokin, Kulyk, and Kolonitsky. All 3 of them say, it's not just one witness, it's not just Shokin. All 3 of them say that Joe Biden put Hunter Biden in order to protect the Burisma company.
Giuliani is referring here to Viktor Shokin, the prosecutor general of Ukraine, who Joe Biden allegedly bribed the Ukrainian government to fire in order to stop investigating his son Hunter Biden. Shokin and the other 2 names Giuliani references here are witnesses OAN tried to get to the U.S., but each ran into visa issues at the border. Those 3 witnesses would provide bombshell testimony proving that Biden was in league with the former Ukrainian government, illegally bribing and threatening Ukraine unless they closed the investigations into Biden's son, Hunter.
So if I were trying this case like I did many, many bribery cases, and I may gratuitously add never lost one, if I were trying it, I would put those first 3 witnesses up. They'd establish the bribery. I'd put in the evidence of the money laundering. I show how the money got to him in surreptitious ways. I would get those conversations about setting up the bribe that the State Department still hasn't released.
When we return, we introduce you to the 3 Ukrainians and what each of them bring to the story. Then we swear them in. Don't go anywhere. You're watching a One American News Investigates exclusive with Rudy Giuliani and special guests. You won't want to miss what they have to say. We come back to previewing our 3 witnesses with President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. 3 of them each bring a narrative utterly inconvenient for Adam Schiff and the Democrats as their impeachment inquiry snakes its way into impeachment proper. So who are they, and why should we listen to them? Andrei Teleshenko, the former Ukrainian diplomat to the Embassy of Ukraine here in Washington. He was the former advisor to the Prosecutor General of Ukraine. and the former advisor to the first deputy prime minister of Ukraine on security and intelligence. What is important about his testimony?
So another whole area of crime here, collusion. So Andriy Teleshenko was in a very, very strong position to observe this. He worked in the prosecutor's office as a fairly young man at a fairly low level. He can testify that Biden's son was under investigation, which the Biden people are lying about. He can testify that the case wasn't debunked, which the Biden people are lying about, and so is the American media, NBC, CBS, the New York Times. If the case was debunked, there's no evidence. There's no debunking report, right? Because nobody debunked it. And then Andriy can explain the other side of this case that's equally as damaging, and that is the tremendous amount of interference by the Ukrainian government in the 2016 election at the request of the Democratic National Committee, the Hillary Clinton campaign, Fusion GPS. He was there for direct conversations with the ambassador, who eventually had to be dismissed.
Next witness, Mikhailo Okendovsky. He is the former head of Ukraine's Central Election Commission, one of the most influential positions in the Ukrainian government. Tell us why we are hearing from him.
Well, it's relevant because, first of all, when you prosecute a case or try a case or you try to search for the truth, every witness is going to have some issue. Shokin has some credibility issues. How do you deal with it? You deal with it by some other witness who maybe has different issues but corroborates it. You know, people forget that we convict criminals on the testimony of people like Sammy the Bull, people who cooperate. Criminals do business with other criminals. He can testify to the substantial involvement of the U.S. government and Joe Biden in trying to collect dirty information on Trump and the Trump campaign. And then he can also establish how much money Poroshenko took. That was well known. How much money Yatsenuk took. That was well known.
Petro Poroshenko, president of Ukraine from 2014 to 2019, was seen as a close friend and ally to Vice President Joe Biden. Poroshenko was initially praised as being the outsider Ukrainians hoped could battle decades of corruption.
Why is that important? That shows that whole thing about Biden wanted Shokin fired because he was corrupt is untrue. Because all he cared about was minor corruption, but didn't seem to care about somebody stealing most of the country, who he was palling around with.
Okendovsky's testimony debunks the Schiff and Biden narrative that DNC collusion with Ukraine was all a giant conspiracy theory. Next, we have Andriy Artemenko, and he is a former member of the Ukrainian parliament.
Artemenko was an opponent of Poroshenko for several reasons. Artemenko probably picked up earlier than most what a big crook Poroshenko was. Poroshenko came into office with a great deal of hope. Two very, very knowledgeable Ukrainians told me he's become the biggest crook in the country. And I said, why? And they said he wasn't content being a millionaire. He wanted to be a billionaire. And he wanted to be an oligarch like, the ones he sees around him. So Artemenko recognized that fairly early. He was a major opponent of Poroshenko.
Artemenko became an outspoken critic of Biden's friend, then-President Poroshenko. Giuliani says Artemenko, who had been pro-Ukrainian his entire life in his opposition to Poroshenko, was then painted as a pro-Russian spy by Poroshenko and his media minions, despite the fact that Poroshenko was known to have been buying used equipment from Russia, a country killing Ukrainians daily.
And then finally, he can deal with the one really big dramatic transaction that has actually resulted in a court finding of illegal behavior by the Ukrainians with the Democrats in Ukraine, and that is the Black Ledger. The Black Ledger was necessary because the FBI had closed a case on Manafort 2 years earlier. Now they were asked to revive it, kind of as a political hit on the president. They needed new evidence. They didn't have new evidence. And lo and behold, a Black Ledger shows up on the doorstep of a parliamentarian. He runs to other parliamentarians that were all against Trump. This is supposed to be a book of bribes from the Party of Regions in which Manafort on 22 occasions And this evidence was not done for law enforcement purposes, because before law enforcement had a chance to even open the book, the information was given to the New York Times by Alexandra Chalupa.
Name is listed as one of the names to have received compensation in the Black Ledger.
And that Black Ledger, as far as it relates to you, which you found out in late May of 2016 or so.
Later even,
right?
Later.
So you found out that that Black Ledger had 4 payments to you. Something like $1,500.
It doesn't even say that it's about
reimbursement.
payments.
Reimbursement for travel, right?
It says about compensation of travel expenses, but it doesn't say that this money were actually paid to me.
Did you get $16,000 in travel expenses?
No.
Is that true? So the entry about you is false.
Yes.
And the purported initials are false.
Exactly.
So as far as you know, with regard to you, the Black Ledger is phony.
Exactly.
When we return, we next address another stunning fact about the Black Ledger that Democrats are conveniently ignoring. The implications of proving the Black Ledger is a manufactured document doctored by Democrats has grave implications, assuming our Justice and State Departments don't continue to cover it all up. We just asked 2 of our 3 witnesses about the Black Ledger. Remember, anyone who dares question the authenticity of this book of bribes is immediately labeled a tinfoil Mad Hatter by Democrats. And for Democrats, it is imperative that they continue to insist the document is real and is proof Trump is an agent of Russia. If proven that Democrats funded, manufactured, and peddled this document in conjunction with Ukraine to take down candidate Trump, they risk losing any scrap of credibility they have left when it comes to impeaching this president. But 2 of our 4 witnesses just provided compelling testimony. The Black Ledger has Democrat fingerprints all over it. If true, this would debunk Schiff's claims that the Black Ledger is a real document.
It is absolutely fake material, and as regards to some particular lines, allegedly of handwriting similar to my handwriting, I'm totally sure that I know for sure that I never wrote that.
Signed.
I never wrote that, and I never signed.
You
that.
are a very significant witness here.
The handwriting is really similar to mine. Signatures are really similar to mine. But as member of the Central Election Commission for 15 years, I have signed tens of thousands of documents, and my signature was the possession of many institutions in Ukraine.
So you say that your signature was forged?
My handwriting and my signature obviously do not belong to me.
Our 3rd witness, the former member of Ukrainian Parliament, Andrei Artemenko, adds a shocking and inconvenient detail. The party of region from whom this ledger allegedly came from ceased to exist by February 2014. Okendowski adds that nowhere on the Black Ledger is mention of the party of regions, yet it is arbitrarily reported as coming from the party. And Artemenko notes how the Black Ledger covers a period from 2007 until 2012. Artemenko reminds us how the party of regions office suffered a massive fire by an arsonist. This Black Ledger, adds Okendowski and Artemenko, if the dates are to be believed, had to have survived this fire by some miracle.
Everyone knows that. There was an arson at the office of the party of region. The office was burned and one person was killed. I was very much surprised that four years later, after the last date indicated in the so-called ledger, and more than 2 years later, Party of Region ceased its active operations as political party, the so-called ledger appeared in Ukraine. The way it was presented to public created feeling that it is a very well orchestrated screenplay of a pulp fiction movie or a political thriller written well in advance and not in Ukraine.
Artemenko concurs, adding the ledger was made in America.
You call it Black Ledger. It comes from here. It's not from Ukraine. We never even used this one.
Both Okendowski and Artemenko believe the U.S. Embassy was involved in the manufacture and dissemination of the Black Ledger.
Every individual, every institution who participated in presenting these materials to public was in some context, in some way, in my opinion, linked to United States Embassy in Kiev. It was looking very, very artificial.
So these
very
papers
artificial.
miraculously are supposed to have survived this fire. Mayor, remind the audience, the jury, if you will, why the Black Ledger, if it is proven, if these three gentlemen are correct in their testimony, that the Black Ledger is a manufactured document by the Democrat Party, remind the jury why that's important.
Well, it's important for this reason. They had closed down the case on Manafort in 2014. Greenaway, the FBI agent, apparently, and Jovanovic, the ambassador, wanted to rejuvenate the case. And that conversation from the Obama White House was, go find us evidence on the party of regents so we can reopen the case.
From the Obama White House.
The FBI had taken the position. We closed the case. We analyzed all the evidence then. So it's going to look stupid if we reopen it for no reason. You have to present us, and this is very common in law enforcement, with newly discovered evidence. Now, you've got to make a decision. Was there really newly discovered evidence, this Black Ledger, or did they make up newly discovered evidence?
Manufacture evidence.
So here's the reason why you would think they made it up. All the records of this party were destroyed in 2014.
In a fire.
So the chance that this ledger survived is minimal. If it did survive, I kind of, as a prosecutor, want to see a couple of burn marks on it. Like a few burnt. At least they could have done a better job, like little match, thrown a few ashes on it.
Exactly.
I mean, the mafia would have done that. But even then, we could have probably proved it wasn't.
All of this was happening under President Poroshenko's watch, Joe Biden's friend and ally. Each witness then relayed how each of their reputations were maligned soon after they started speaking out against election corruption, DNC collusion, or suspicions about this Black Ledger and where it came from. At this point, we step back and ask, what's the other side of the story? Democrats and their media slaves claim each and every one of these men are either spies or compromised figures. For the diplomat Teleshenko, Democrats diminish his title as a minor player in the embassy and someone who offers no evidence. Add to this a healthy dose of a baseless Russian spy accusation. To this, Teleshenko offered us his CV and his background. As advisor to the Prosecutor General's office, Teleshenko outranked even diplomats Democrats have brought in as star witnesses for themselves, outranking men like George Kent. The smear campaign against Teleshenko began, he says, after he started speaking out at the embassy and left in June of 2016. Teleshenko decided to whistleblow on the collusional activities he had witnessed at the embassy.
I tried to go through official channels to get this case investigated by the FBI and the Department of Justice, and through the State Department, through official channels. And I was blocked and put as a Russian spy, also as Mr. Artemenko, and tried to destroy my reputation so nobody would listen to me in Washington and nobody would take me seriously. And then when I got this information to Mr. Giuliani and this evidence, then it got even worse, but still at least I know that it's going to get investigated.
For Artemenko, his fate was more than a smearing in the media. As a member of the U.S.-Ukrainian caucus, he watched U.S. politics closely. During the 2016 campaign, he came out in support of Donald Trump, the candidate. This support, combined with his popularity and his outspokenness against Poroshenko and Poroshenko's relationship with Joe Biden, resulted in Artemenko being stripped of his Ukrainian citizenship. He says his story is a mere snapshot of a far bigger problem happening geopolitically between the U.S. and Ukraine.
The American people deserve to know truth. What exactly happens in Ukraine during the campaign 2016? What exactly happens in the highest level of Ukrainian politics and most important things with the decision maker who lives in Ukraine, who's been part of Revolution and Dignity, who fighting against corruption, who fighting against everything what is wrong in Ukraine the years. Unfortunately, they fighting against Republicans in general, against President Trump in person, and how they try to support Democrats in general and Hillary Clinton in person. The New York Times published an article. We find out the back channel between Trump and Putin. In the middle of this back channel, this is member of Ukrainian parliament, Andriy Artemenko.
They accused you of being
me, exactly me. It's divided my life to before.
You were the back channel to Putin?
I been the back channel between Trump and Putin.
Did you talk to the New York Times?
He's a spy. He's also a spy.
Accuse me.
And we got him here. We better watch out. He's a spy.
Two quick questions, just to finish up the New York Times accusation that you are
please.
a Putin-Trump back channel.
Thank you.
Have you ever met Vladimir Putin?
No, never.
You've never spoken to him?
I never spoken to him. I never met him.
Have you ever met Donald Trump?
No, I never met him.
As for the former election commissioner Michael Okendowski, the Ukrainian media began piling onto him also. Okendowski claims his name was thrown into the black ledger as a means to legitimize it, and his family has endured libel and slander from the media as a result, including an absurd fake news moment when the media accused Okendowski of living in a house bigger than the White House, wealthy from such spoils as his $16,000 in the black ledger. Here's the house Soros-funded media pushed as belonging to Okendowski. Here's the house he lives in.
They needed to discredit the statements I did at that time, and they have chosen the way of discrediting me personally rather than discrediting my statements, which were absolutely true and correct at that time. Went to court against one of TV channels who spread that news, and that TV channel immediately offered amicable settlement agreement. They immediately admitted that this information was false and incorrect, but nevertheless, many Ukrainians still believe that legendary house, that miracle house, still believes to me and my family.
These three witnesses have just provided personal, first-hand testimony about what Rudy Giuliani calls the smoking gun of DNC collusion. They each implored Americans to urge our state and Justice Department to look into DNC collusion that took place in their country. A crime, they say, that should not go overlooked and is ultimately divisive and damaging in U.S.-Ukrainian relations. Next up, we dig into a proverbial burial site called Burisma, a haunted ground of dismissed cases, fired officials, and millions of dollars. Brace yourselves. The clues and testimony we find next with our three witnesses should have every American outraged. Having discussed and laid out the Burisma case in part one, I asked our witnesses about the current state of investigations on Burisma. Under U.S. Ambassador Yovanovitch, who testified in Adam Schiff's impeachment hearings, accusing Giuliani of smearing her reputation, Yovanovitch is attributed to having closed whatever remaining cases were left open on Burisma once Biden got the prosecutor general fired. Under the Zelensky administration, however, there is hope, especially with figures like new prosecutor Konstantin Kulik. Just hours before our panel in D.C., Kulik announced he would reopen the Burisma investigations and investigate also Burisma's founder Zlochevsky.
Как независимый прокурор открывает новые уголовные дела.
To open these cases as an independent prosecutor to continue investigation.
However, while taping this segment, Kulik was fired. As of this broadcast, we are still collecting facts surrounding his firing.
I interviewed Mr. Kulik. He has very, very substantial knowledge of the whole thing, of the collusion, the black book, the bribery, the Biden bribery, the extent of it.
Я делаю очевидный логический вывод, что он был
He's another witness. He would,
по команде со стороны реальных владельцев и руководителей генерального прокурора и его конечных владельцев округа США.
That he was fired because of the final authorization made by the prosecutor general.
You know, if I put this case together and tried it, as a Hobbs Act extortion case or a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act case, or a Kulyuk would be the second witness. Shokin would be the first witness. Kulyuk would be the second witness. Kolanitsky would be the third witness. Joe's tape would be the fourth witness.
These people that you have named right now, they do not have an opportunity to come to the United States and testify here.
This is where our panel then dived into the political weeds of the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine and how it is entangled in a system of NGOs who are directly funded, say our witnesses, by George Soros money. Okendowski argues that the Ukrainian system needs to be completely overhauled. It is currently run by a complicated system of third-party NGOs like NABU, the Anti-Corruption Bureau, facades for Soros money and a globalist agenda, wholly endorsed by the Democrat Party.
Мені дуже не подобається ситуація, коли українська дійсність підтверджує, що боротьба з корупцією є однією із форм, в яких існує корупція.
Well, I don't like the situation with actually, and that is the Ukrainian reality, I would say so, that fighting corruption.
Okendowski explains how in Ukraine, George Kent, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, actually got involved and helped create many of these so-called anti-corruption agencies and systems. Kent was a key Schiff witness.
So, if I understand you correctly, George Kent, who worked for the State Department, drafted the NABU-SAP laws, which were based on the George Soros ANTAC model. They were forced through. They took all of the corruption cases out of the Prosecutor General's office and gave it to them. And then it is widely reported the NABU was run by the American Embassy and told what to do by the American Embassy. Am I wrong about that? Is that an incorrect assumption?
Я особисто не знайомий з паном Кентом.
Okendowski says this is the understanding in Ukraine, but he doesn't have direct knowledge. He does know, however, George Kent was allegedly involved in personally blocking Okendowski's visa.
Was trying to block.
He was trying to block your visa.
My next visa.
When was that?
It was in the end of his tenure at the embassy in 2018. But his name was mentioned in the context of canceling my visit to the United States as chairman of the Central Election Commission in August of 2018. Allegedly, his position was that Mr. Okendowski can never be admitted to the territory of the United States.
Does this happen a lot in Ukraine, that visas get canceled by the embassy because they don't want?
I know from media that visas for many Ukrainian officials who wanted to come to Ukraine, to the United States to testify in particular cases, were deliberately either blocked or canceled by U.S. Embassy officials in Kiev.
Okendowski, ever the lawyer, emphasizes he doesn't have material evidence for these visa blockages.
Now, this is something that Andre could actually speak to as well.
Yeah, I met Mr. Kent a couple of times throughout my professional career.
So he created this anti-corruption agency.
2014, he comes in and talks about pushing and forming a NABU, pushing all the powers from the prosecutor's office and giving it mostly to the NABU and making it as an independent body for Ukrainians. But the outcome was that it was an independent body for Ukrainians because it was a dependent body for the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. And the second time I met Mr. Kent was when I organized a meeting for him, which he testified.
We return to some tantalizing questions posed at the State Department. Why is our U.S. Embassy in Ukraine under George Kent denying visas to key witnesses who could provide our Justice Department valuable information? Artemenko says the answer is obvious.
It's politically motivated decision by the Ambassador Taylor, by the people who working in the consular department of the U.S. Embassy in Kiev.
And
then why were they doing it? They serve to the Democrats. They serve to the Mr. Soros.
Here, Okendowski jumped in and added that the American people have a right to know that their taxpayer dollars are being misappropriated and misused by their U.S. State Department in Ukraine in order to obstruct justice and shield millions of dollars worth of corruption down the line. This State Department is being run by a single political party.
How do you see this being solved?
It has to be solved through right now investigation. What the President of the United States asked Mr. Zelensky to, together with Attorney General Barr and the FBI, to investigate what really happened in Ukraine, and it's going to outflow this investigation of what happened here in the United States, and to give the public, American public, Ukrainian public, investigation has to be done in Ukraine together with United States authorities, and to show the public what really happened.
Here in the United States, there's a certain reaction among Democrats, not Republicans or independents, but Democrats, particularly Schiff and people like that this was a terrible conversation that the president had with Mr. Zelensky. I read the conversation. It seems very cordial. It seems like a normal conversation. Mr. Zelensky has said he wasn't pressured by it numerous times. How was it received in Ukraine? Do people in Ukraine think this was...
They don't understand what the fuss is about here in Washington. It's like, what are you guys talking about? Yeah. What happened? I, as a former government official, saw talks with the U.S. ambassador before on a normal level where we had more quid pro quo, more pressure than during this phone call.
Me personally, having graduated from International Law Department of the Institute of International Relations, I didn't notice anything unusual in the transcript in that conversation. It was polite. It was a conversation of presidents of two alien states. And me personally, I don't see any ground for the start of impeachment proceedings, which started here in the United States based on that conversation. In Ukraine, many people believe that that request for investigation was just a request for justice.
That's the investigation I began in November of 2018.
Exactly.
Which was 2 years before Biden was going to run for office. 6 months before he announced for office. It was in the middle of the Mueller investigation. And the way it was presented to me, there's evidence in the Ukraine of collusion, much worse than anything in Russia, if anything took place in Russia. But worse than that, Biden is involved in it, and he's involved in getting secret money, Pinchuk's secret money, to Hillary, illegally. At that time, he was in the middle of the Mueller investigation. The president was.
And you were his personal...
And as his defense attorney, this is like gold. All of a sudden, I can prove somebody else committed the crime. And that's why I started it. And the president of the United States, I can tell you this, is asking for this. He's mostly interested in the collusion more than he is Biden. He spent 100 lines on the collusion and 5 lines on little Joe Biden. But just about that. His real interest is the collusion because he wants it to stop.
He's asking for...
And he really believes that he has a president. And it's a bit of a test of this president, which we said at the beginning. Is he going to go... Is he going to be what we always hope Poroshenko would be, or him, or is he going to go the other way? And I think he feels if he can show he can investigate and clean up this historical corruption, we got a good chance.
A good chance after years of embedded corruption at the highest levels, something Ukrainians and the Trump administration are cautiously optimistic is due for a change that can only be accomplished under the right leadership.